The arena was silent. Only the heavy steps of the alien warlord echoed across the stone floor. His tall frame moved like a mountain, his eyes burning with rage, his armor made of black metal shining under the pale lights of the hall. Behind him stood rows of alien soldiers, their heads lowered, none daring to speak. In the center of the arena, a pool of blood still marked the place where his champion had fallen. The champion who was never supposed to lose. The warlord's voice thundered through the hall, shaking the air like a storm. "Who killed my champion?" he roared, his words rolling like thunder across the rows of warriors. The question was not only a demand, it was a curse, a threat, and a promise of revenge. No alien moved, no voice answered. Fear had frozen every tongue. At the far corner of the arena, a small group of human cadets stood together, their uniforms dusty and torn from training. They were guests in this alien world, soldiers from Earth sent to learn, to survive, and to prove that humanity had a place among the stars. But today, they were not just cadets. They were suspects, because the one who had struck down the warlord's champion was standing among them. The cadets looked at each other nervously, their hearts pounding. No one spoke, no one wanted to step forward because they all knew the price of honesty here. The warlord had promised to crush whoever dared to face him, to break their bones until nothing remained. The alien soldiers whispered to each other, their voices filled with hate and disbelief. How could one of these small humans bring down the greatest warrior of their people? The warlord raised his weapon, a long blade glowing with dark fire. "I will ask once more," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Who dared slay my champion?" The silence grew heavier, pressing down like chains on every shoulder. The cadets could feel the worry. 8 of alien eyes on them, waiting, demanding. Among the humans stood a young cadet, her face pale but her eyes steady. She was the smallest among them, hardly more than a girl, with dark hair tied back and hands trembling at her side. She remembered the fight, the impossible duel that had brought her here. She remembered the champion's massive blade crashing down, the ground shaking under his steps, and she remembered how her body had moved faster than thought, guided by something deeper than fear. In that moment she had struck, and the impossible had happened. Now the warlord's rage filled the hall, and her secret burned inside her like fire. Her comrades looked at her, silently begging her not to speak, not to reveal herself, but she knew the truth would not stay hidden. If no one confessed, the warlord would destroy them all. She took a deep breath, her heart beating so fast it hurt. Slowly, her hand began to rise. The movement was small, almost invisible at first, but in the silence of the hall, it was louder than thunder. Her hand lifted higher, steady now, her arm straightened. Gasps spread through the alien crowd, their laughter starting like sharp knives in the air. "This child?" one of them shouted, his voice full of scorn. "She is nothing, she is weaker than a shadow," another jeered. The laughter grew louder, cruel, and echoing against the walls, but the warlord did not laugh. He turned his burning eyes toward the girl, his blade lowering slightly as he stepped closer. His massive shadow fell over her, and for a moment the entire hall seemed to shrink. "Step forward," he commanded, his voice cutting through the laughter like a blade. The girl's knees shook, but she forced herself to move. One step, then another, until she stood alone in the wide circle of the arena. The eyes of thousands watched her, some in anger, some in disbelief. The warlord circled her slowly, his heavy steps shaking the ground. "You," he growled, "a fragile creature of earth, claimed to have killed my champion." The girl did not lower her eyes, though her heart screamed inside her chest. "I do not claim," she said softly, her voice clear enough for all to hear. "I did." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the arena erupted, voices of aliens shouting, screaming, some demanding her death, some calling her a liar. The warlord raised his hand, and all noise stopped. His eyes burned with fury, but also with something else, something that none of his soldiers could see: curiosity. This human child had stepped forward without fear, and for that he needed answers. The warlord's lips curled into a snarl, his voice heavy with both rage and interest. "Then you will tell me how," he said, his words rolling like fire. "How a human child destroyed the might of my champion." The arena held its breath, waiting for her answer, but the girl only stood taller, her eyes steady, her hand no longer trembling. The storm was only beginning. The young cadet stood in the circle of the arena, her hands still raised, her body small compared to the massive warlord towering before her. The alien crowd whispered in disbelief, their voices like waves crashing against stone. Some laughed at the sight of a human girl claiming such a deed. Others hissed with fury, demanding her punishment. But all of them waited for what would happen next. The warlord leaned down, his glowing eyes locked on her face. His voice was low, dangerous, filled with the promise of blood. "You dare claim victory over my champion," he said, his words echoing through the hall like iron. The cadet did not look away, her lips pressed together, her breath steady. She had already made her choice, and there was no way back. Behind her, the other human cadets felt their hearts racing, fear gripping them like chains. They wanted to pull her back, to beg her to stay silent, but it was too late. The warlord had seen her, and no force in Tas. He galaxy could undo what she had done. The warlord turned slowly, his massive voice rising for all to hear. "This small human," he growled, "claims she killed my champion." The aliens roared with laughter, their deep voices shaking the air. "Impossible," one shouted. "She is a child, weaker than our lowest soldier." "Lies," another hissed. "She dares insult the blood of the warlord's line." The laughter turned to anger, sharp and dangerous. The crowd demanded her execution, their voices chanting for her death. But the warlord raised his hand, and silence fell like a sword. His eyes burned as he studied her, searching for weakness, for fear. But instead he found something he had not expected. Defiance. She did not tremble now. She did not hide her eyes. She stood tall in the face of thousands, and that made him pause. The warlord stepped closer, his heavy boots striking the floor like thunder. He circled her slowly, his blade still glowing in his hand. "You are small," he said, "and weak, yet you do not run." "Why?" he demanded. "Why do you admit to such a thing when you know it means your death?" The girl lifted her chin, her voice soft but unshaken. "Because it is the truth," she said, and because my silence would condemn my friends." Her words struck the arena like a spear. Even the aliens who hated her paused, hearing the honesty in her voice. The warlord narrowed his eyes, his fury mixed now with something heavier. He saw no lies in her face, no fear in her stance. And though he longed to crush her, a part of him wanted to test her further. "Then you will prove it," he growled. "You will show this army how you destroyed the strongest warrior of our people." The crowd erupted in cheers and jeers, excited by the promise of blood. The human cadets gasped in horror, knowing what this meant. The girl's heart pounded in her chest, but her eyes did not waver. She had already fought once, and now she would have to fight again, not just for her life, but for the honor of humanity. The warlord pointed to the ground where his champion had fallen. "Here," he commanded, "you will tell the story of how it happened. Not with words, but with action." The aliens banged their weapons against the walls, chanting for the trial to begin. The girl's hands trembled, but she clenched them into fists. Her mind flashed back to the duel, to the moment when death had been inches from her throat. Her breath quickened, her body tensed, and slowly she stepped into the center. The warlord called forth one of his soldiers, a massive alien twice her size. "Show me," he demanded, "how you killed my champion." The soldier snarled, stepping forward with his blade raised, his teeth sharp and eyes filled with hate. The crowd cheered, certain they would see the girl crushed within moments, but the cadet only lowered her stance, her feet steady, her eyes sharp. She knew she could not match their size, but she could match them with speed and wit. The soldier attacked, his blade cutting the air with deadly force. The crowd shouted with joy, expecting to see her body fall. But the girl moved, fast as lightning, sliding under the swing, her hand striking his leg. The soldier stumbled, caught off guard. The aliens gasped, their cheers faltering. The cadet spun, her body light and quick, dodging blow after blow. Her movements were not those of a trained soldier alone, but of a human fighting with every instinct to survive. She darted forward, striking again, and the soldier crashed to the ground, his blade slipping from his hand. The crowd fell silent, shock spreading like fire through the arena. The girl stepped back, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. She had not killed him, but she had proved her speed, her will, her truth. The warlord's eyes narrowed, his fury turning colder, sharper. Perhaps she was not lying after all. Perhaps this small human truly had due. "Nay, the impossible." The warlord raised his voice once more. "This is no ordinary human," he declared, his words thundering across the arena. "She will not be judged by laughter. She will be judged by trials." The crowd roared, half in anger, half in excitement. The girl lowered her hand, her heart steady now, her eyes burning with fire. She had spoken the truth, and now the galaxy itself would test her. The warlord's blade lifted high, his shadow falling over her once more. "The first trial begins," he said, and the arena shook with the sound of 1,000 voices. The warlord's words echoed through the arena. "The first trial begins," he declared, and the crowd roared with savage excitement. But before the trial could start, the young cadet closed her eyes, her breath slowed, her heart pounding with memories she had tried to bury. Because before this day, before the arena filled with fury, there was the duel, the moment when she had faced the warlord's champion and lived to tell the tale. The memory rose like fire in her mind. She remembered the dusty training field, the alien banners hanging high above. The champion had stood in the center, towering, his armor black as night, his blade the length of 3 men. He had been undefeated, feared not only by his enemies but by his own people. To challenge him was madness, to fight him was death. And yet, when his voice thundered across the field demanding an opponent, it was her feet that carried her forward. The other cadets had tried to stop her, their voices full of panic. "You can't," they whispered. "He'll kill you in 1 strike." But something inside her refused to step back. It wasn't courage alone, it was something else. A voice that told her if humanity wanted respect, someone had to take the risk, and she could not let fear chain her. The champion laughed when he saw her, a cruel sound that shook the air. "Is your warrior," he mocked, his voice carrying across the crowd of aliens. "A child, fragile and weak. This is the best Earth can send." The aliens joined his laughter, pointing, jeering, their sharp teeth flashing in delight. But the cadet said nothing. She only stepped into the circle, her fists clenched, her eyes sharp. The champion grinned, eager to crush her, eager to humiliate her people. The duel began with thunder. The champion moved fast despite his size, his blade cutting through the air with deadly force. The ground cracked where his strikes landed, each swing powerful enough to break stone. The cadet darted aside, her body moving on instinct. She could feel the wind of death brushing her skin with every strike she barely escaped. Her comrades screamed for her to run, but she did not. Her feet carried her in circles, her eyes searching, her mind racing. The champion grew impatient, his roars shaking the air. "You cannot hide forever," he shouted, swinging his blade in a wide arc. The cadet dove, rolling across the ground, dust rising around her. Her body ached, her lungs burned, but her heart beat louder than fear. She remembered her training. Humans were not the strongest, but they were clever. They were survivors, hunters, and dreamers. And she would not die without showing that truth. The champion charged, his massive footfalls shaking the ground like drums. The cadet waited, her eyes locked on him, and at the last moment she moved. She slid under his strike, her hand grabbing a sharp stone from the ground. With all her strength, she struck at the joint of his leg. The champion roared in pain, stumbling for the first time. The aliens gasped, their laughter cut short. A human had drawn blood. The champion's rage exploded, his strikes faster, wilder, deadly. The cadet barely dodged, her body moving with the speed of desperation. Every near miss was a whisper of death, every breath a gift. But in his fury, the champion made mistakes. He swung too hard, too wide, his weight unbalanced, and in that instant she saw her chance. She rushed forward, her body low, her hands steady. Her stone struck again at the joint of his leg. Harder this time. The champion fell to one knee, his blade crashing into the ground, sparks flying. The arena went silent, the aliens watching in disbelief. The cadet's chest heaved, sweat burning her eyes, but she did not stop. She darted forward once more, her movements precise, her courage burning like fire. And with a final strike, she drove the stone into the weak point under his armor. The champion let out one last roar, his massive body collapsing with a crash. The earth shook and silence followed. For a moment, the cadet stood frozen, unable to believe what she had done. The greatest warrior of the alien race lay dead at her feet. The crowd erupted, half in rage, half in disbelief. Her comrades stared in shock, their mouths open, their eyes wide. She had done the impossible. She had slain the champion. The memory ended, her eyes snapping open to the present. The alien arena loomed around her once more, the warlord's fury burning bright, but she no longer trembled. She had already faced death and survived, and now she would face trials, tests designed to break her. Her hands tightened into fists, her breath steady. If she had slain the champion once, she could do it again, not for herself, but for every human watching, not for glory, but for survival. The warlord pointed his blade at her, his voice booming like thunder. Then prove it again, he said, his words heavy with rage and curiosity. Prove to the galaxy that your hand truly brought down my champion. The crowd roared once more, eager for blood. The cadet raised her head, her eyes filled with fire. She had no armor, no weapons, only her will, but she whispered to herself the words that carried her too. Through the duel, I will not fall. And the storm of trials began. The arena shook with the warlord's roar, his voice like thunder splitting the sky. His champion was dead, and now the killer stood before him, not a mighty warrior, not a seasoned soldier, but a human girl, small and fragile. The weight of shame pressed on his chest. The anger of his people burned in his ears. And yet there was something else hidden beneath the fire. A question, a gnawing curiosity. How? He circled her slowly, his shadow falling over her again and again, his blade glowing like a shard of fire. You should be dead, he growled, his voice filled with venom. No child of Earth should have stood against my champion. No fragile human should have touched his armor, and yet you struck him down. The cadet's breath was heavy but steady, her eyes locked on him, her body refusing to bow. I fought because I had no choice, she said, her words soft but carrying across the hall. If I ran, my people would fall. If I stayed silent, humanity would remain weak in your eyes. I fought because I must. The aliens in the crowd jeered at her words, spitting insults, calling her a liar, demanding her death. But the warlord lifted his hand and the noise died instantly. His gaze pierced her like a blade, his teeth grinding as he fought with his own thoughts. Part of him wanted to crush her where she stood, to erase the insult to his honor. But another part, darker and deeper, wanted to see more. You speak with courage, he said, his tone sharp. But courage is not enough. Words are air, and air cannot kill warriors. He raised his weapon high, the light flashing across the arena. Your survival was not chance. It was not luck. Something more drives you, something your kind hides from us. His voice lowered, dangerous and sharp. I will break you to find it. The cadet's heart pounded, but she did not move. She held her ground. Her fellow cadets watched from the shadows, their hands trembling, their voices stuck in their throats. One of them whispered, She cannot survive this, but another answered, She already did once, maybe she can again. Hope and fear tangled together in their chests as they watched her face the storm. The warlord turned to his army, his voice a booming command. Bring forth the flames. The crowd roared, stomping their feet, their weapons clashing against stone. From the far side of the arena, alien soldiers dragged massive braziers into the circle, fire spilling out, crackling like hungry beasts. The heat rose, filling the air with smoke, the shadows of the flames dancing across the warlord's armor. This is your first trial, he said, his eyes glowing like embers. Walk through the fire. If you are what you claim, the flames will not consume you. The cadet looked at the wall of fire before her, her chest tightening, her skin already burning from the heat. Her breath caught, fear whispering at the edges of her mind. But she remembered the duel, the impossible moment when she had stood against death and won. If she had survived that, she could not turn away now. She stepped forward, the crowd screaming, some cheering for her death, others watching in silence. The fire loomed higher, its heat pressing like a living hand against her body. She clenched her fists, whispered to herself, and stepped into the flames. The fire wrapped around her, its heat like knives, her body trembling, her lungs screaming for air, but she did not stop. She pushed forward, each step tearing at her strength, each breath cutting her chest. The aliens leaned forward, some laughing, some shocked, their eyes wide as the human girl walked where no alien dared. Her comrades cried out, their hands gripping each other, praying she would not fall. The flames clawed at her, her vision blurred, but her will burned hotter than the fire. She thought of her home, of Earth, of the billions who had never seen these stars. A thought of their hope, their weakness in the eyes of the galaxy, and her voice rose inside her chest. I will not break. With one final step, she stumbled out of the fire, her body scorched, her uniform blackened, but her head held high. The crowd erupted, some in rage, some in awe, their voices clashing like storms. The warlord's eyes widened. For the first time in years, surprise broke across his face. The girl had walked through the fire and lived. Her chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, her body shaking but her spirit unbroken. The warlord lifted his blade slowly, his voice thundering once more. "Stronger than fire," he said, almost to himself. He stepped closer, his shadow looming over her trembling frame. "You are not a warrior of size, nor of strength, but something else, something I do not yet understand." The arena fell silent, every alien holding their breath. The warlord's eyes burned with fury and curiosity alike. "If you truly killed my champion," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "then you will survive what comes next." The girl lifted her head, her voice hoarse but steady. "Then test me," she said, her words cutting through the silence. The crowd erupted once more, hungry for more blood. The warlord's lips curled into a grim smile, his blade lowering like a storm cloud ready to break. "The second trial begins at dawn," he declared, and the arena shook with the sound of alien roars. The arena was silent when the dawn came. The alien sky burned red as the suns rose, casting long shadows across the stone floor. The human cadet stood in the circle, her uniform charred, her body scarred from the flames, yet her eyes still burned with quiet fire. The warlord towered above her, his blade in hand, his soldiers gathered like walls of steel. The night before, she had walked through fire and lived, something even his warriors could not do. But the warlord was not satisfied. One trial was never enough. Today, she would face more. He raised his voice, booming across the vast. "Tarina, the human claims victory over my champion," he declared, his words like thunder. "She has survived the fire, but now she must face the trials of blood and shadow." The crowd roared, their chants shaking the walls, their hunger for battle filling the air like smoke. The cadets' comrades huddled in silence, fear gripping them, yet in their eyes flickered something new, hope. The warlord lifted his massive hand, and a gate opened at the far end of the arena. From the darkness came a beast, its scales black as night, its eyes glowing red, its claws long enough to tear through stone. The creature roared, shaking the ground, its breath hot, its teeth dripping with venom. It had been bred for war, released only to punish traitors and crush enemies. Now it would be her test. The cadet's chest tightened, her fists clenched, but she did not run. The beast charged, its claws cutting the air, its roar echoing like thunder. The crowd screamed in joy, certain the human would be torn apart in moments, but the cadet's feet moved fast, her body bending low, her instincts sharp. She dodged, the beast's claws slamming into the ground where she had stood a heartbeat before. Dust and stone exploded, but she kept moving faster, lighter, her heart pounded. Her lungs burned, but her mind was clear. She remembered her duel with the champion, remembered that speed and wit were her only weapons. The beast turned, snapping its jaws, venom spraying across the floor, hissing as it burned the stone. The cadet darted aside, rolling under its strike. She grabbed a broken spear left from the last battle. Its tip cracked but still sharp. With a cry, she struck at the beast's leg. The spear pierced between its scales. The creature roared in pain, stumbling. The crowd gasped, shock spreading again. The warlord's eyes narrowed, his fury mixing with dark fascination. The beast lashed its tail, the force slamming into her and throwing her across the arena. Pain exploded in her chest, her breath torn away. But she forced herself to rise, coughing blood, her hands shaking. The crowd roared for her death, yet she stood again. Her legs wobbled, her body burned, but her spirit refused to fall. The beast charged once more, its roar splitting the air. She waited this time, her eyes locked on its movement, her body steady. At the last moment, she slid to the side, driving the spear into its neck. The creature roared, thrashing, crashing into the stone walls. And then it fell, its body shaking the ground, its red eyes dimming to black. The arena erupted, half in fury, half in awe. The human cadet had killed a beast bred to slaughter armies. The warlord's face hardened, his jaw clenched, his blade tight in his grip. But deep in his eyes there was something else, a flicker of respect. Still, he would not let her rest. "Enough," he roared, his voice silencing the storm of the crowd. "She has survived fire, she has slain the beast, but there is one trial left, the trial of shadow." He raised his hand, and the arena lights dimmed. The shadows stretched across the stone, long and sharp. From the darkness came figures, silent, cloaked in black, their blades curved, their eyes glowing faintly. Assassins, trained to kill without mercy, 3 of them, stepping forward with movements like smoke. The cadet's breath quickened, sweat burning her eyes. She was exhausted, her body torn, but she tightened her fists. She had already faced fire and beasts. Now she would face shadows. The first assassin struck fast, his blade flashing toward her throat. She twisted, barely dodging, the steel grazing her cheek, blood dripping down. The second came from behind, silent as death. She dropped low, his blade cutting the air above her head. The third struck from the front, his speed terrifying. She raised her broken spear, the steel meeting the blade with a sharp crack. The assassins circled, their movements precise, their eyes unblinking. She panted, every muscle screaming, but her mind refused to give up. She waited, watching, her heart slowing despite the chaos. The first assassin lunged again, and this time she moved first. She grabbed his wrist, twisting, forcing the blade into his own chest. The crowd gasped, the assassin fell, his shadow vanishing. The second came instantly, his blade cutting low. She jumped aside, the steel scraping her leg, pain tearing through her. But she spun, her broken spear striking his throat. The assassin collapsed, silent, fading into the dark. The last one stood still, his eyes glowing brighter. He raised his blade slowly, saluting her. And then he came, faster than the others. Their weapons clashed again and again, sparks flying. Her body ached, her vision blurred, but her will burned brighter than fire. With one last cry, she drove her spear forward, piercing his chest. The assassin staggered, his shadow crumbling, and then he was gone. Silence fell over the arena, the flames still burning, the beast's body still lying in the dust. The human cadet stood, shaking, bleeding, yet unbroken. Her chest rose and fell, her eyes still sharp, her spirit unbroken. The crowd was stunned, no laughter, no insults now, only the sound of whispers. The warlord stared at her, his face hard as stone, his blade heavy in his hand. She had passed all 3 trials, fire, beast, and shadow, and though his rage still burned, respect now glimmered in his eyes. "You should not exist," he said, his voice low, trembling with fury and awe. "But you do, and the galaxy will remember this day." The arena was silent, the flames had burned low, the beast's body still lay in the dust, and the assassins had vanished into shadows. At the center stood the human cadet, trembling, bleeding, her uniform torn, yet her eyes still shone like fire. She had walked through flames, slain the beast, and defeated the shadows. No alien had expected her to stand this long, and now whispers spread through the crowd like a storm. The warlord stepped forward, his heavy boots striking the ground, his blade gleaming in the pale light. His eyes were locked on the girl, filled with fury and something deeper, confusion. He had seen warriors stronger than her die in those trials. He had seen champions fail where she now stood, and yet here she was, small, fragile, human, unbroken. "You should be nothing," the warlord growled, his voice sharp as steel. "You are weak in body, your bones break easily, your flesh tears at a touch, yet you still stand. Why?" The cadet lifted her head, her breath heavy, her body shaking, but her voice steady. "Because strength is not only in the body," she said. "It is in the heart, in the will, in the spirit that refuses to bow." Her words carried across the arena, and for a moment the alien crowd fell silent. The warlord's soldiers shifted uneasily, some frowning, others lowering their eyes. The cadets watching from the side felt a fire in their chests, their fear melting into pride. For the first time they saw that her fight was not just hers, it was theirs, it was humanity's. The warlord snarled, but deep inside his chest something twisted. Her words pierced him in a way no blade ever had. He remembered his own champion, the pride of his people, a warrior built for war, who had fallen before this girl. Was it possible that humans carried something his people had never understood? He shook the thought away, raising his blade high, his voice thunderous. "Strength is victory," he roared, "and victory belongs to power." The crowd echoed his cry, their voices shaking the sky, but the girl stepped forward, her small frame dwarfed by his massive shadow. "Victory belongs to those who refuse to stop," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. You can crush our bodies, but you cannot crush our will. You can burn our homes, but you cannot burn our hope. We fight not because we are strong, but because we must. The words struck the arena like lightning. The alien warriors stared at her, some with hatred, some with awe. Even the warlord's own captains shifted uneasily, doubt flickering in their eyes. The cadet's voice grew louder, stronger, carried by something greater than herself. My champion was not strength alone. It was every human who taught me never to give up. It was the voices of my people who stand even when the galaxy calls them weak. The warlord's jaw tightened, his teeth grinding, but his heart pounded with a strange fire. This girl was not just speaking for herself. She was speaking for a world, a species, and the galaxy was listening. He struck his blade into the ground, sparks flying, his voice booming. If you think your spirit makes you strong, then prove it against me. The crowd erupted in wild cries, their roars shaking the air. The warlord pointed to the cadet, his voice sharp as thunder. One strike, and he growled, survive one strike from me, and I will believe you. The cadet's breath caught, her heart thundering. One strike from the warlord could shatter stone, it could break her body in half, but she nodded, her eyes never leaving his. I will not fall, she whispered. The warlord raised his massive blade, the ground trembling with the weight of his fury. The crowd held its breath, every eye locked on the human girl. Her comrades pressed against the walls, their voices caught between prayers and screams. The warlord's roar shook the air as his blade came down, a strike that could end mountains. The girl moved, not with strength, not with power, but with speed, instinct, and will. She dropped low, her body sliding beneath the crushing blow. The blade struck the ground with a crack that split the arena, dust exploding into the sky. When the smoke cleared, the cadet was still standing, her hands scraped. Her body bruised but alive, she turned to face him, her voice steady. You see, she said, you can strike me, but you cannot break me. The arena fell silent, the crowd frozen in shock. The warlord's eyes widened, his breath caught. For the first time in years, he felt something he had forgotten, respect. The silence lasted only a moment before whispers spread, voices clashing, shouts rising. Some cried for her death, others for her honor. The warlord raised his hand, silencing them all, his voice low but heavy. This human is no ordinary child, he said, his words trembling with rage and awe alike. She carries something my people have never known, something greater than strength. The cadet lifted her head, her chest heaving, her spirit unbroken. This is humanity, she said, her words ringing like steel, and we are not done. The warlord stared at her, the fire of fury and the spark of wonder burning together in his eyes. The galaxy itself seemed to pause, waiting for what he would decide. The arena was still, dust hung in the air, the ground cracked from the warlord's strike, the silence heavy as stone. At the center, the human cadet stood, bruised, bleeding, yet alive. She had faced fire, beast, shadow, and the warlord's own fury, and still she had not fallen. The alien crowd watched with wide eyes, some filled with rage, others with awe. Their voices whispered like wind, a storm of disbelief spreading through the ranks. Impossible, some muttered. She should be dead. Unbroken, others whispered. The human is unbroken. The warlord stood tall, his blade still buried in the earth, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He looked down at her, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he could not crush. Respect. This small human, this fragile cadet, had done what no warrior of his people had ever achieved. She had faced his trials and lived, not with strength of body but with strength of will. He pulled his blade free, sparks flying, the weight of his decision sing down on him like chains. His people demanded vengeance, their roars echoing through the stands. Kill her, they cried. Honor demands her death. Others shouted for mercy, their voices trembling with doubt. The arena split in two, rage against awe, blood against respect. The warlord raised his hand and silence fell once more. He stared at the girl, his voice heavy, his words sharp. You stand before me broken in body, yet your spirit burns brighter than fire. I could crush you now, one strike and it would be done, and my people would cheer. But if I do, the galaxy will never forget your defiance. The cadet lifted her head, her voice soft but clear. I did not fight for glory. I did not fight for honor. I fought because I had to, because humanity must never bow. If you kill me, it changes nothing. There will be others. There will always be others." Her words echoed like thunder, her small voice piercing the walls of stone. Her comrades wept quietly, their hearts swelling with pride. The aliens shifted uneasily, their eyes torn between hatred and respect. The warlord's grip on his blade trembled, his heart pounding with a war of its own. He remembered his champion, a warrior of pure strength, and how easily strength had fallen. He remembered the fire, the beast, the shadows, and how this girl had endured. Strength alone had not carried her, something deeper had, something his people had never known. Hope. He raised his blade high, the crowd holding its breath, the cadets crying out. For a moment it seemed the end had come, but then slowly he turned the blade, striking it into the ground beside her, the steel ringing like thunder. The arena gasped, their voices caught in shock. The warlord bent one knee, his massive form lowering before the human girl. His voice thundered, not with rage but with reverence. "No warrior of mine has ever shown such spirit, no champion of my people has ever fought with such fire. You are small, yet greater than any I have faced. Today I kneel not to weakness but to will, and to the truth of humanity." The arena exploded in chaos, roars shaking the air. Some cried in fury, others in awe, but the image could not be undone. The warlord of 1,000 battles had bent the knee to a human cadet. The girl's legs trembled, tears stinging her eyes, but she stood tall, her voice steady. "I am not alone," she said, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "There are billions like me, on a world you call weak, on a world you call small. But when the galaxy comes against us, we will rise, we will endure, we will never fall." Her words rang like steel, like fire, like a promise carved into the stars. Her comrades shouted, their voices breaking with pride. The aliens stared, their doubts growing like cracks in stone. The warlord rose, towering once more, his blade resting against his shoulder. He turned to his army, his voice shaking the walls. "Today, we have seen something greater than strength. We have seen spirit, the fire of a people who will not bow. Remember this human, remember her face, for she has changed the galaxy." The arena erupted, not in laughter, not in mockery, but in something new, fear and respect. The cadet stood alone, her body broken but her spirit unshaken, and in that moment humanity was no longer weak in the eyes of the stars. The warlord's final words rumbled like thunder. "The galaxy will remember."